Hey, Stux here. Today I'm going to answer some of the questions that you guys posted in the hashtag AskStuxAnything channel in my Discord server. If you want your own questions to be answered, simply head to the link in the description to the Discord server and make sure to ping me with whatever question you have. I might not always respond immediately because I'm busy with some other stuff, but that is your best way to get your questions answered, and the best ones actually make it onto the show. Now, the first question is by Kelvin, and he asks, how well do you think someone with a family, spouse and kids, can make it in Overwatch esports? So this really depends on how much time you have available, and that how much time you have available depends on what your family agrees with, it depends on what kind of job you have, and it depends on how much time you're actually willing to invest. Right? So if your family doesn't really want you to spend too much time playing the game, then obviously that's something that you have to prioritize, ideally. And if you yourself don't want to really sacrifice time that you could use with your family in order to go pro, then that's something that you need to take into account as well. Now, there are cases of esports relationships and esports families. I think the best example of that is Pecking10. He is the current interim head coach, although he really is the head coach of the LA Valiant Overwatch League team. And to my knowledge, he is married and he is also a father, which means that clearly the time commitment that you have in esports is manageable with a supporting family, even if you are a father. And don't forget that being a head coach is actually a relatively time-intensive role. So if he can find a happy medium between his own private and family life and also his responsibilities and obligations within the organization, then clearly it's possible. Another example of a relationship within esports is Sebiolvi, actually from the New York Excelsior, who is married to my knowledge. Now, if you can put in the time, then you can realistically make it as far as about anyone else, right? So just to put into perspective, really top tier 3 unsigned contenders teams, they put in around 4 hours a day. They usually take a day off, and sometimes they invest around an hour into VOD review. Once you get into the Overwatch League, those time commitments rise, where having at least 6 to 8 hour days minimum is usually the standard, depending on what your team on. And again, it depends on how much time you can invest. I'm not too sure about your own personal situation, on where your skill levels are, but if we're talking way into the future, assuming that you are at the right skill level, then it clearly is possible to make it far in esports with a family, but it depends on a case-by-case basis. Now, the second question is by Arcane, and he asks, I'm a DPS main, and now that 222 is coming soon, should I focus on practicing all DPS heroes, or just a little pool like hit scan or projectile? Now, let me quickly explain hero pools before role lock. There was always a balance between specializing and being flexible. If you were too flexible, then you're not actually investing enough time into each individual character, which means that whenever you got into a mirror matchup, chances are that the person on the other team simply invests more time than you and you can't really compete with them. On the other hand, being too specialized was also a little bit problematic, because if you got into a game where none of the characters in your hero pool were actually viable, you were screwed. So previously what I recommended was a 3-2-1 hero pool. So that's 3 characters, 2 different roles, and 1 signature, right? With the main roles obviously being main tank, off tank, flex DPS, hit scan specialist, main support, and flex support, and the signatures being hit scan or projectile, just to make aiming a little bit easier and to make warm-ups a little bit faster. But now that role lock is out, you don't really have to make those compromises anymore, because you can guarantee that there will be no situations where you have to play a character that is outside of your role because you're limited to that specific role. So right now my recommendation is just focus on one character, one specific role, and don't try to flex too much, both from a ranked standpoint and also from the standpoint of someone on the path to pro, trying to become better. Now, the last question is by Pelicon, and he asks, what should I be looking for when VOD reviewing? I usually find just small positioning mistakes. I know there are other mistakes I'm making, but I can't recognize them, or I don't know what to do differently. So first of all, Pelicon, you're actually a green name in my Discord, which means you had a coaching session. So you don't actually have to post the questions in Ask Stux, you can also just DM me and I'm going to take care of it. Now, whenever you're doing a VOD review, you always want to make it kind of divided into multiple steps. So step 1 is you need to segment the VOD into each individual team fight. Once you have done that, you need to go down a priority list. You need to look at each individual team fight, and you need to first ask yourself, did we die that team fight because, did we lose that team fight because I died? The second question is, did we lose that team fight because one of my teammates died or wasn't being effective? Or 3, did we lose that team fight because someone on the enemy team was being very effective? Right? If you lost a team fight because you died, then you need to ask yourself what you died for. What was the play that we were trying to make? Was it even needed? And if it was a good play in of itself, was there anything you could have done in terms of execution or ability usage or waiting for your team in order to prevent that death? Now, the second phase, which is checking if one of your teammates is dying or if one of your teammates is being ineffective, right? It's just very easy. If your Winston jumps in and he dies, ask yourself, is there anything that I could have done to help him? Maybe I could have distracted someone on the enemy team. Maybe I could have used some of my abilities to save him, right? And then lastly, let's say that the enemy team has a Widowmaker and she ends up getting a 3k during a team fight. And you didn't die during the team fight, and you don't really feel like your teammates did anything wrong or they were being useless, right? In that case, you need to ask yourself the question, what could I have done to prevent that Widowmaker from getting a 3k? And if you're a Genji, then maybe going for the Widowmaker instead of shooting tanks might have been the answer in that situation. And that's generally how to go about doing VOD reviews at a beginner level to kind of get the ropes. All right, so that does it for this episode. Again, if you want to ask your own questions, simply go to the Discord link down in the description and post them in the hashtag AskStux anything channel. My name is Stux, and I'd like to thank you for learning.